Good morning. Welcome. I'm Marjorie Turner, Senior Vice President here at the Urban Institute, and I'm really delighted that everyone could join us here on this soggy morning. And I also want to welcome everyone who's joined us as a virtual audience watching over webcast live stream. If you are on the webcast and you have questions along the way that you want to join in the conversation, you can submit those questions anytime to events@urban.org, and they'll get passed up to the moderator and pulled into the conversation. I also want to encourage everybody, whether you're here in person or online, to expand the conversation today by sharing your thoughts on social media, and you would use the hashtag #live@urban. And it would be great if you could also include speakers' Twitter handles, which are in the agenda. So I'd like to thank JP Morgan Chase for supporting this convening this morning, but also for supporting the body of work we've been doing with them on moving to middle skill jobs. And that's the work we're going to be talking about with the panel this morning. The Urban Institute and JP Morgan Chase have been working together since 2014 to leverage data and evidence in support of economic mobility, broadly defined. And our collaboration has been kind of cool, I think. It brings together the tremendous expertise and resources of a gigantic bank with the knowledge building capacities of the Urban Institute. And I think we've accomplished a lot together in equipping change makers at different levels across the country with evidence that helps them tackle issues of critical importance in their communities. Issues like financial capability, community and economic development, and workforce development, which is the domain we're focusing on this morning. So within the workforce development arena, today's topic is a really important one. There are a lot of policies and programs that are designed to help adults and young people take their very first steps on a career pathway, really get in the door the first time. But there's been a lot less attention to the next steps, to fulfilling the promise of a career pathway by helping people who've been successful in the first step take the next step and the next step toward middle skill jobs that really provide family sustaining wages and the prospect of a stable career. So today we're releasing a new research brief that discusses what we know about career advancement strategies and the approaches organizations around the country are taking to better support advancement beyond the first step on a career pathway. And we're really excited to have 4 experts who are going to share their thoughts on the opportunities and the challenges of supporting this kind of career advancement process toward middle skill jobs. Before we dive into the panel, I'm just going to give a little background on Jenny Sparandera, who is going to be joining us. She's a little bit late. She's going to be joining for the closing. But she is the head of workforce strategy and executive director of global philanthropy at JP Morgan Chase. So she leads JP Morgan Chase's global workforce portfolio. And she brings to that role a tremendously broad cross-sector experience working in public and philanthropic sectors at global and national levels, and also at the local community level. Just as an example, in Philadelphia, Jenny served as executive director of the Job Opportunity Investment Network, which was a partnership between philanthropy, government, community organizations, and employers for developing and testing industry-led training. And before that, she was the first director of human capital investments for the city of Philadelphia, where she was responsible for the coordination of anti-poverty programs and workforce development initiatives. So it'll be great to hear from her at the end of the program instead of the beginning about the JP Morgan Chase New Skills at Work initiative, which has been in place for about 5 years now, a $250 million global initiative aimed at informing and accelerating efforts to support demand-driven skills training for adults. And as the knowledge building partner for that initiative, we're really proud of the way our research, including the research we'll be releasing today, has helped improve local workforce systems and build evidence on key workforce issues and challenges like the immigrant workforce, employer engagement, and career pathways. So Jenny will speak at the end, but at this point I will turn the mic over to Demetra Nightingale, Institute Fellow here at the Urban Institute, who's going to be introducing and moderating the panel. Thanks.
Okay, we may be ready. Thank you so much. It's great to see so many people here. This is an important topic and one that the Urban Institute, as Marge said, has spent a lot of time, many years, looking at. So we're really excited about this discussion and certainly the panel that we have today. There's been a lot of new research and old research and evaluations on the value and the impact of job training and skills development and career pathway models. But there's really, less research, less evidence still on how to move up the ladder. And so today's discussion is really about how do we take that next step and from the first step, because we want to be able to include sort of a career progression, whether it's in the same job, a different job, hopefully in the same industry, but could be in different ones. So today we're going to hear from experts in research, policy, and program practice about what it takes to move up and what some of their lessons are. You all have information about each of them, so I won't spend a lot of time introducing them, but just very quickly from the far left, Brenda Dan Messier, welcome back to Washington. We're always glad to have you back here. She's the former Assistant Secretary for Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the Department of Labor, and currently
Education.
Education, yeah. I got labor on my mind.
I know
right?
you do.
When I was at Labor, we worked together very closely. And she's currently the Rhode Island Postsecondary Commissioner. So I'm sure Rhode Island is glad to have you there. Harry Holzer, who's a Lafarge professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University and an expert on job training and careers for adults and for youth. Yvonne Lau, who's the Dean of Academic Affairs at Career Pathways at Instituto de Progreso Latino, a program I always love to come and visit. So we're thrilled to have you here. And Jamie Fall from the Aspen Institute's Upskill America program. And Aspen has certainly been taking a major leadership role in moving in this direction. So we'll have a few discussions, a few questions and panel discussions, and then we'll open it up to questions that any of you here in the room have, and those of you who are joining us on the webcast, as Marge said, can send your own questions in to events@urban.org. And all of you can share your your thoughts and ideas on Twitter at Live at Urban. So we want as much participation as possible, and we'll have plenty of time at the end for answering or asking more questions. Just to begin with, I'm going to ask just sort of a preliminary question for each of the experts here, and beginning with Harry. Many of us at the Urban Institute, most of us at the Urban Institute are researchers like Harry is, and so I'm wondering if Harry can sort of give us a little sense of what we know from the research about whether or not we're making progress for middle career advancement, and what kinds of information might still be missing from research.
Well, thank you, Demetra, and it's always nice to come back to the Urban Institute. Right, spent some time in the past. We don't have a lot of evidence right now on the effectiveness of career pathway programs on bringing people to the next level. We have a lot of programs that have been rigorously evaluated, usually around 2 years into the program, which is too short a time frame for evaluating the longer term progression. I actually know of one evaluation that goes 6 years. That's for Project Quest in San Antonio. That's actually quite positive. That's not explicitly a career pathways program, so it's a little different. I think there's some broader descriptive research that at least gives us some facts. And the basic facts are that relatively, so the question is, if low-skilled young people or adults start a community college program and then stop, either after they finish something or not, or once they gain a first certificate, how often do they come back and try to move up? The answer is not very often. Tom Bailey at Columbia wrote a paper on this last year about stacking credentials that basically said very few people stack, and when they do, it doesn't have labor market value. I thought it was slightly more negative than it needed to be. I have been doing data work on Kentucky, administrative data from Kentucky, with a lot of community college data, and we're also finding the fraction of people who either attain a certificate and move on, or who leave community college and come back is again about 20 to 30% of the total of people who either finish something or people who stop. So the overall numbers are relatively low, and if you're looking at adults instead of youth, or if you're looking at low-income adults, the numbers are even lower. So the broad data are not too encouraging right now. And I think we have other bits and pieces of research, and a lot of it's actually contained in the book I wrote last year with Sandy Baum, who's here, on the challenges some of these workers face, the challenges the community colleges face, the employer perspective. I think that sheds some light on the challenges. And again, this might sound negative. None of these challenges are insurmountable. And with some resources and some good program construction, we could probably make progress. But let me sort of lay out what I think the data say about the challenges. Among the workers who might be the students, I think there's three primary issues. One is that a lot of them lack the basic academic skills to handle a higher level of work, especially if it's technical work, on moving to the second rung in the ladder. A lot of them lack the kind of information and social capital about where are these new jobs located, what are the supports that are available. Oftentimes they may not know about supports that are in fact available in some cases. And then I think the third challenge for a lot of them is simply, these are often low-income adults with families. They need to work full-time, if not more, especially single parents. It's very, very hard to even crank out the time. So those are all challenges, I think, on the student side. On the employer side, let's face it, employers are only going to make these investments in these workers if they think it's in their business interest, as it should be, and they're often reluctant to invest in workers whom they think either won't make it at a higher stage or whom they think won't stick around very long. And of course, oftentimes their perceptions may be stereotyped and maybe the realities, but that's their view. And also, Jamie's going to talk about more positive. And these circumstances can change. Like right now in a very tight labor market, employers might be more interested. And I think Jamie will lay out other circumstances. So, but that's, a lot of employers come with that perspective. These are not folks who merit our investment of resources. And then finally, the community colleges, as many of us know, have a lot of challenges. We expect them to wear many hats, academic hats, workforce hats. In fact, the academic hats get much more attention and resources than the workforce side. They're always strapped for cash. We know that there's support services that work, but they tend to be expensive in a lot of cases, and they can't often afford. So I think those are sort of three sets of challenges for three different parties that the research suggests we would need to address to make a lot more progress on this.
Thank you so much, Harry. That was great. And in just a few minutes, he's able to summarize where we are in the research. That's why we have Harry here. And Brenda, I wanted to shift to you because certainly the federal policies are very important, and what the federal legislation, congressional action, and agency actions and authority is very important. But we know that states are also at different stages of thinking about policies that are going to improve the upskilling prospects for workers. So I know in Rhode Island you've got some big initiatives that are underway looking at post-secondary attainment goals. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the attainment goal initiative and also challenges or successes that you're seeing in some of the policies.
Happy to do that, Demetra. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here as Rhode Island's post-secondary commissioner. We have three main priorities in our office. One is to reach our very ambitious attainment goal. Two is to eliminate equity gaps in our system of higher education. And three is to make higher education more affordable. In 2016, Governor Raimondo set a very ambitious attainment goal that 70% of all Rhode Islanders by 2025 would have post-high school certifications, degrees, and credentials. And when I came in 2017, we began to develop a plan to realize that very ambitious goal. And two things became quite evident. One is we would not be able to reach that goal unless we serve adult students. In fact, 2/3 of our numbers are going to come from adult students. Second, we know we cannot also reach that goal unless we eliminate the huge equity gaps in our higher education system. And so what we did was we initially felt heartened that we were at 47%, which is the national average. But when we disaggregated the data, it was not a very pretty picture. Only 30.6 of our African Americans are reaching attainment levels, 29.5 Southeast Asians, 20% Latinx, and 19.5 for Native Americans. So we have to use the levers at our disposal to really make sure we're eliminating those equity gaps and reaching our attainment goal. And the levers that we have at our disposal, Demetra, are making sure we have the right policy, programs, and services in place. And I'm just going to give you some brief examples, and then we can dig deeper during the question and answer period. But one, since we want to serve adults more effectively, we are establishing a system-wide assessment policy. Now, we only have 3 public institutions of higher education in Rhode Island, but all 3 have their own separate assessment policies. So we want to make sure that we have a system-wide assessment policy that recognizes that adults do not come to higher education without work experience and training that should be able to translate into academic credit. And we have a particular emphasis on veterans, immigrant professionals, folks who are in apprenticeship programs, and others, to make sure that we can accelerate their advancement on a career pathway. Second, we want to also be much more responsive to the employer community who has real needs in terms of upskilling their own employees. And one of the great examples that we've been able to establish is a Westerly Education Center. We initially set up this center to be responsive to Electric Boat's needs, to train their incumbent workforce, their pre-employment workers, and also to provide leadership development to their management team. It's been an unbelievable model of flexibility, being able to be nimble and being able to be responsive to the employer community. It's been so successful in the first year that we've broadened out beyond EB to many other employers. And now the governor put into her budget last year expanding the model to other parts of the state and being much more responsive to the employer community in northern Rhode Island. I know Rhode Island's a very small state, but people do not like to travel. Johan can tell you.
Right.
If you have to go 20 minutes, they won't go to a meeting that's 20 minutes away. So you have to provide services in that way. And then last, and Jamie I know is going to talk about this, we had to look at, we're also analyzing the tuition reimbursement or policies in place and saying to our employer community, are these really the right policies in place to help upskill your current employees? And so we're helping them to understand that low-wage workers really can't put the money up in order to be reimbursed. So that's a a quick way to say that we have at our disposal policies that we can put in place to make sure that we're serving adult students more effectively. And we also know that in Rhode Island we have 120,000 adults with some college and no degree that we need to really re-engage back into it. In addition, we have over 150,000 adults who only have a high school diploma. So policies, programs, and services for us are the way that we're really helping to advance folks on their career pathway.
That's a great segue into what Yvonne can tell us about sort of what the the post-secondary educational systems and schools can do to move toward achieving the kinds of goals and strategies and policies that that Brenda just talked about. And Instituto has a long history of sort of developing innovative strategies and innovative approaches, and I know you've now got taken another step, which would move toward the college, the new college initiative. So I'm wondering if you could tell us something about what it is that organizations and training institutions should be considering as they're building their programs, particularly drawing on Instituto's long and successful career.
Sure. First of all, I just want to thank the Urban Institute for having us and for being with such a great dynamic group of speakers. So first, I mean, I think there are many challenges, and I think the first thing is that you really, as a nonprofit, as a community organization, you really have to carve out your niche, right? Because I mean, Chicago certainly is a very large market. People have many choices. Why should they pick you, right?
Right.
And so, and then I think you have to really identify your target clientele. At Instituto, we think that we have sort of a triple, what we call the triple non-traditionals, right? TNTs. We have immigrants who are ELLs, English language learners. We have mainly single parents, mainly single mothers, and then we have first generation college students. So, you know, this is a very at-risk population. I think that an Urban Institute brief that Lauren did in January talked about this. You know, so there are many things that these TNTs need that maybe a lot of organizations don't necessarily think of. And then in terms of outreach, how do you market yourself, right? I mean, we've been effective with certain markets for very specific services, but we're struggling actually with our last piece, which is the college. We just launched Istituto College, which will offer an associate's degree in nursing. It's very ambitious. We're very, very small, but you know, we thought that we needed to do this in order to really create this pipeline for nursing. And so that type of outreach, you know, we are struggling to let it be known that now, instead of having just bridge, you know, career pathway programs, we are now offering a degree program. And we certainly understand that it's a very, very limited audience. And I think that funding certainly is very critical for nonprofits. I mean, how do we maintain a very high level of services while we continuously have to seek funding? You know, that's a struggle, I think, for all of us. And I think the last point, the last challenge that I want to touch on is scaling, right? That we can produce high quality outcomes on a small scale in our specific niche, but how do we do that if we really want to go on a larger scale or with different communities? At Instituto in Chicago, if any of you familiar with Chicago, you know, Pilsen is really right next to Chinatown. I do have a dream that we're going to expand our career pathway programs to serve Chinese immigrants. And it's a natural because Chinatown and Pilsen are right next to each other. But in order to do that, we're going to have to think about, right, how do we really scale up? And in terms of opportunities, I think that there's no shortage of opportunities that we have so many partners. When we were interviewed for the brief that was released today, you know, we talked about this, how, you know, certainly as a small nonprofit, we have to partner with other higher ed institutions. Our former president of Instituto is now the chancellor of Chicago City Colleges, so certainly, you know, Chicago City Colleges is one of our major partners, and we have all sorts of healthcare employers that we partner with and other community organizations. A lot of these organizations can provide services that we simply can't, right? And they can certainly do it better and more easily. And I think that another opportunity is that the space that we're really calling remedial education, that still has many needs. I think these are people that have made it to the first step, but they're progressing to that middle skill level. But this is a very diverse market, and it's certainly not as well funded or recognized because there's no credentials or there's no special certifications in this space. And I guess my last point, since we were asked to talk about future opportunities for research, I think a lot more research needs to be done on standardized testing. Are these tests really doing what they claim to do? Why is there continuously seems to be a bias against specific populations, even if the test is for general knowledge? We have had major challenges with our students at every level, from standardized tests like PSATs, SATs, the ALEX test for city colleges, the TEAS tests, which is the entry-level nursing exam, and then we probably will have problems with the NCLEX, for being an RN. So I'd love to see more research in that area.
Great. You've all raised lots of questions in my head, but I'm resisting asking them right now because I want to make sure we hear from Jamie, because we know, and some of the research that we've done here and others have done as well, most training in the U.S. is provided by businesses and by employers and in the workplace. And some of the work that Aspen is doing and others, and Aspen's Upskill America initiative is producing some critical insights into working with employers and firms and sort of connecting what employers do to what public policy and public institutions and CBOs are able to do. So Jamie, tell us a little bit about what you see as sort of some of the challenges and also the early successes and opportunities in working with employers and getting them more engaged with upward mobility.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with a great panel, and I have to say an impressive audience as well. That's always great also. So I'll try to hit those individually. The successes, I think I would start with really, we're seeing a lot more employers investing in upskilling programs, which is a great sign to begin with. Programs range everything from pre-employment training to apprenticeship programs to incumbent worker training, certifications, high school completion programs, all the way up to college degree programs. So we've really seen quite a bit of new investment in 2018 in particular. Some of the most high-profile announcements around college degree programs probably would be Walmart and Disney. Both have announced that they're going to be paying for college degrees for employers. Disney picks up all the cost, and Walmart requires employees to pay $1 a day for those college degree programs. So that's a real positive sign. The other thing that I think is even more positive is that these are not tuition reimbursement programs, and that's one of the things that Brenda touched on, is we're seeing a lot of companies really reevaluate the models of the tuition assistance programs, eliminating tuition assistance requirements, which, as you know, someone who's working in entry-level, probably minimum wage or close to a job, or perhaps 2 minimum wage jobs, they're not going to have the funds to pay for those programs. So those are both very positive things that we're seeing right now. And those are leading to far better take-up rates than what a lot of companies have experienced in the past, where you've had companies talk about 2 and 3% take-up rates. You've really had some great take-up rates right out of the chute with these new programs. As far as challenges go, I guess I would hit on 3 points there. Employers are still struggling to clearly identify the skills that they're going to need 3 to 5 years out. Mm-hmm. There's so much changing, it's happening so fast that they're still quite uncertain the mix of technical skills versus what were traditionally called soft skills that employees are going to need. So that's something that is still a bit of a drag on some of the training that's going on. But even when those skills are clearly identified, the higher education system does still struggle to be able to turn around curriculum in the time that an employer needs it. So often it's 18 months to 2 years for a higher education institute to complete curriculum. So that's another one of the challenges that we're facing. And then certainly I've already touched on this at the individual level, where you have someone working a low wage or minimum wage job, just where they have the resources and the time that makes it available for them to take advantage of a program, no matter how well designed that it might be. Mm-hmm. As far as opportunities go, I think the real opportunity is in these more flexible programs. We're seeing more employers investing in prior learning assessments, which help people get credit before they begin a program. Also more flexible programs, alternate credit, and more effective online programs than what used to be available. Also, we're seeing some successes in the type of equipment that employers are able to use. Walmart's making a significant investment in some virtual reality equipment that has really helped them with some of the skills training that they're doing in their locations, and certainly more things available online and video-based education. And then finally, I would point to just the work to get better data around these programs. Mm-hmm. Walmart, is part of the program that they've rolled out, they've also committed to work with Lumina and others to really study the results of their programs that they're rolling out, so in sharing that data, so we can all learn from what's happening there. So those are the successes, challenges, and opportunities at high level.
Those are wonderful. The food for our conversation is rich, and in a few minutes I'll open it up so that all of you can ask the questions that you have. I just had a few that I wanted to throw back. I think that three of you, Brenda, Yvonne, and Jamie, all mentioned assessments and testing. And as Brenda was talking, I was wondering, now you've moved toward a standardized assessment in all of the community colleges in the state. Did you have to develop a new one, or which one is being used?
No.
Or is it in standardized policy or standardized
It's standardizing the policy to make sure it facilitates students' mobility and able to transfer the credits that they've gotten. Actually, at the Community College of Rhode Island, they're using multiple measures. They understand that one assessment is not appropriate specifically for the students that they're serving. So I meant that we were working on a system-wide assessment policy that would benefit the students.
Mm-hmm. And Yvonne, are there changes either at the federal level or at the state or city level that would help improve the assessment and testing approaches and address some of the challenges you mentioned?
Well, for us, since our program was approved by the Illinois Board of Nursing, we had to follow their types of standard tests, right, which is the TEAS exam for all nursing schools. But we have found that our TNTs, they have really a hard time, meeting the requisite passing scores. I mean, they are largely, even before they enter our doors, they have already taken, college, all the prerequisites and everything. But to pass the T score at the level that we're asking, which is standard for all nursing schools, right? It's they need special help. And I think that
so what both of you are saying is that there's a need for better assessment on even on the first rung of the ladder. Mm-hmm. And how does that then limit what happens at the next level? So even for those who are able to make the first rung, are you finding that there are challenges in moving up, say, in nursing as well, or in healthcare?
Definitely, and that's why these are students who came to us with stellar records. They had maybe 3.0 and above GPAs. They showed we had them write all these different essays, and we had one-on-one interviews. They have demonstrated tremendous grit, right, to get to this point. But when it comes to taking something like the TEAS tests, we found that actually very few of them had the passing score on the first try. So then we decided we needed to help them and invest in all different types of preparation, in order for them to just be at that level. So I think that it's something that you have to recognize, what types of special challenges your specific clientele has.
So Harry, do we have information on sort of the progression and the success of people being able to move up after the first level?
In the programs?
In research, or in programs, either one.
The research base is thin.
It's
like
thin
I said
on that.
before, and absent a really good intervention, we know that if we talk about populations of adults with low achievement or English language, with any of these challenges, that the success rates are low. We start from that baseline, which doesn't mean that there can't be good interventions. And I would even, I don't think career pathway programs might be cost effective and successful in many cases if they just get people to first base and get them, if there's a significant cost-effective improvement for a lot of people, it would be even better if we could get some limited, it might be a limited number of those people that move on to higher. So it's a worthy goal. It may be challenging to
And
achieve.
if you don't get to that first one, you can't.
Well, then you're.
next.
And just on the standardized testing that was mentioned before, this is a much broader problem in community colleges.
Yes.
Traditionally, and many community colleges give entrants a standardized test, and if you don't pass algebra or English, you have to go into developmental ed, where you don't get any credits. And then Judy Scott Clayton has done research on this that shows a lot of those tests have very little predictive power for how well people do afterwards.
Right.
And that's ultimately the research test. And the notion that there's one test that everybody in all these different is also maybe a silly notion. So I think there's a lot of good work that needs to be done there to not unfairly weed people out. And of course, when there is a need for remediation, integrating it into the skills training is usually the best approach.
As you were also talking, and as Jamie was talking, I was thinking that I'm wondering if Jamie can address this. Is there a need for more connection between the post-secondary education systems or the community-based organizations and the workplace once people move from the training into work? And is that something that employers value? And do you see that as an area that is increasing? You talked about a lot of ways that employers are increasing, but what is the employer perspective on collaborating and partnering with these organizations that we've heard about?
Well, I wish we were seeing a lot more of it, frankly, but the positive sign that we do see is that employers seem to be breaking down into kind of two categories. One of them is a company that really wants to create a learning culture where the employees that work for them can continue to build their skills, advance their education, and be able to move up in their careers. And the second category of employer is really an employer that sees these education, training, and development programs as benefits, and they want to control the cost of these benefits. So this first category is where we see the really positive developments, right? A better relationship with higher education, more removing of this hard line between learning and work, where there's more people going back and forth between the two, more involvement of higher education in the workplace, and closer connectedness. But again, there are still way too many employers.
Can you say something more about the second group? What do you mean they see education programs as benefits that they want to control?
Well, they
cost.
look at tuition assistance programs, for example, as just cost.
The worker benefits.
Right,
So,
right, as a worker benefit, and they only want to spend so much on it, and they really don't care, about making the program more flexible, so it's more user-friendly for workers.
Okay.
Demetra, I think there's a real role for the community-based organizations to partner with higher education and employers. They are closest to the folks on the ground and understand the obstacles and the barriers that folks have to overcome. And so they can provide the very important support services that folks who have already first of all, who haven't even gotten on a career pathway, but to help folks advance on the career pathways. The community-based organizations can really provide those support services. But to Yvonne's point, there's a capacity issue and there's a funding issue. And so they have to be supported in those efforts. But also higher education needs to work in partnership with community-based organizations also to make sure that they're providing the support services and that they're providing them the information on what it will take to be successful to advance on a career pathway. So you've got to have collaborative partnerships all across government and with community-based organizations and employers in the higher ed.
One other question that was in my head as I was listening is, especially listening to Jamie, and it is great to see the progress that's being made, and it's great also to see the federal government encouraging more training or apprentices or whatever the term that's being used. It is clearly for building the workforce, and that is important. Jamie, what do you see the likelihood of the challenges for this this trend that you've explained continuing during the next recession or as the economy goes down? Is the interest of employers because it's hard for them to find workers, or is it because of a commitment to improving the livelihood and opportunities for workers?
Well, that is absolutely one of the things that keeps me up at night, just so we're clear about that. But on the really positive side, there are other things beyond just the economy, right? Every survey of millennials talks about how if they're not receiving opportunities for development and advancement, they're not going to stay with an employer. So employers that have younger workers that really want to make sure that they keep them around, keep them engaged, this has got to be a priority for them. Also, you're seeing advancements in skill requirements in some fields that are really going to require employers to continue to invest in their workers in that way. And we do have now, thanks to Lumina Foundation and Accenture, some return on investment studies that show that this is actually a positive for the bottom line when an employer invests in education, training, and development for their workers. So there are positive signs out there, but whether or not it will withstand a recession, I wish I had the answer to that.
We don't know
yet. I'd be sleeping better, right?
Yeah, it raises some questions. Again, for those who are joining us on the webcast, if you have questions, please submit them by email to events@urban.org, and we will try to address those. I think we'll open it up for questions and comments from people online and also here in the room. And also when you speak, please wait for a microphone so that those who are joining us online can hear you and identify yourselves as well. So any comments or questions? Yes. Microphone over here. Oh, down here in the front. Sorry.
Hello, my name is Ariane Hegovish from the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Thank you so much. It's a great panel. Harry Holzer at the beginning mentioned the constraints for people, particularly single parents having no time and no money. And we just, and no information or no time to get the information. We know that women are more likely to pursue education and they're more likely to end up in debt, and single parents don't finish, right? So I'm just wondering whether you have any thoughts of how we can integrate supporting the gender dimensions into what you're saying and into supports you're developing. And the second issue is we just did a study in a small thing in West Virginia, right way around, on getting women into manufacturing. One of the most striking things was that some of the women who went through a pre-apprenticeship program there had thought that basically it was still illegal for women to work in good manufacturing. So the information gap is huge. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, so she's really asking two kinds of questions. One is sort of the gender issues, gender in the workplace, gender movement into sectors that maybe not considered traditional for women, and also the information needs. any of you wish to answer.
So I'll just say a few things. There's actually a few advantages that the women have over the men. They do a lot better academically, on average. This is a stereotype, but the data show on average women in the classroom do better. And B, a lot of them, interestingly, are more comfortable than men in some of the more traditionally female industries that are growing, the most obvious one being healthcare. In the Kentucky data, women vastly outnumber men in terms of their willingness to do stuff in the healthcare industry, even though it's a very good sector in terms of the return, not in all jobs, not nurse assistants necessarily, but so those are some of the advantages. But yes, making them aware of opportunities in other sectors, and clearly the child care issue is so important, and making sure that folks have access to child care. And I think if you're a single parent, making sure that while you're, access to earning while you learn is really critical, I think, for single parents, especially if they want to take at least half time to try to pursue this. So I think those are some of the things that would be nice to see in programs.
So Demetra, I think for us, there are a lot of policies that we can put into place and are putting in place to make sure that we're welcoming to single parents, and that's in the form of child care, but also revamping our whole financial aid policies that frankly were geared to youth and not for adults. And so we're looking at how we can really transform our whole financial aid policy to be much more supportive of the adults going forward in their careers. And so I think it's the financial aid policy. In terms of the awareness, we are really keen on putting together in Rhode Island an adult promise program that signals to adults that post-secondary education is a viable option for you. And a very major part of any adult promise program has to be a very intensive communications and outreach strategy that speaks to adults and says to them, we welcome you on campus, we have these supports on campus, and you can succeed on campus, and you do not have to follow a traditional trajectory.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I could
That's
just
great.
quickly add, in terms of childcare, it's not just childcare, but it's childcare while you're engaged in the training and education. I mean, certainly at Instituto, we provide childcare, but it's not available for everyone at all times. And I think that just like the Urban Institute's report that came out about building workforce success,
Yes.
childcare programs are critical to any successful career pathway program.
I would just add to the point of information, there are more employers who are adding a career education part of their tuition assistance programs to try to help people make better informed decisions about career opportunities available to them. Mm-hmm. So that's another positive sign that we're seeing.
Okay, certainly information is critical because the labor market is changing so rapidly. It needs to be up to date as much as possible as well. There's a question in the back.
Hi, thank you to the panel. This has been great information, but I've got a question about that word, information. It seems to me that two of the things that you discussed deal with information.
Can you identify yourself, please?
Sorry, one is the question of assessments. Decent assessments are very expensive. I don't see anyone willing to pay for the kind of assessments that actually provide value. Do you? That's one question. Second question is something like Lumina's Connecting Credentials. That provides a great deal of information to prospective employees and prospective employers about the value of different certificates and credentials and things like that. That seems like something that might help solve the information gap. Do you see it in your work and in your analyses?
My sense from the research is that for a lot of the populations we're talking about, just putting information up on a website often is not sufficient. And what it's often, for some it works, for many it doesn't. So often there needs to be some human touch involved, some counselor that kind of makes the information more digestible. Now, of course, that makes it more expensive. And by the way, in one-stop shops, this is sort of what they do. And if they had more resources, they could do it even more effectively. But that's my sense, is that it often needs information alone, absent good delivery and communication, may be insufficient in a lot of cases.
Are colleges and training institutions using the new information that are available? Is it something that's moving into the practice community, or is it still at the application level?
It is moving into the community, but it has to move quicker. It has to be more accessible. It has to be multilingual, and it has to be also based in the community. It can't just be the normal outlets of reaching out to folks. That isn't going to work.
It has to be updated
That's
continuously as well.
Also, just to the point about assessments and the expensiveness, we understand from a student point of view that it's also costly for them to have an assessment of prior learning, to be able to put together all their materials. And so we've inserted in our budget going forward an accelerating student fund that would support students being able to access funding, to be able to bring forth all of their prior experiences and work experiences and training into a portfolio if that's what's required, or any other way. Maybe there's some exams that they need to take in order to demonstrate their competencies and proficiencies. But that has also been a barrier, and so we're trying to eliminate those barriers by putting some financial incentives in place.
And what about employers? Do employers use the information systems, and do they value sort of the credentials and the information that's coming out from new systems?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the areas that I would be really uncomfortable just lumping employers into one category, right? Because you do see positive signs about some of it happening, but it's not very much of it. A lot more needs to be happening to really understand, what people come into the workplace with and what they're capable of.
Okay.
And sadly, probably assessments are still used to some extent as screening people out, as opposed to opening doors to let people in.
Yvonne.
And I would like to add, I mean, to your question, sir, certainly we'd love to have, access to better assessments, and, we were lucky that actually the ABT and the PACE study team just did a review of Institutos Carreras and Salud programs, and, that was a very collaborative experience. But, we don't have access. We even though there is some trickle down of the types of data that you're talking about, we have to rely on all our caseworkers, right? Our wraparound service team to really translate that into a way that our clients can take advantage of. So you're right, Harry, that the delivery is very and we pride ourselves in providing a very comprehensive wraparound service approach, so that every one of our clients gets financial coaching, job placement, career coaching, but that's not. It's very costly, really, to do that for every client. So,
but it's needed.
Absolutely critical, and it's critical for retention into not only our career pathway programs, but now for our college.
And Demetra, we have to be more willing to not just use paper and pencils, or we have to be able to allow individuals to demonstrate their own competencies and proficiencies, and that's an area that we have to blow right open.
In a more applied way.
Absolutely, and that's what we're doing with our Westerly Education Center, is allowing individuals to demonstrate to employers the competencies and proficiencies they've acquired.
Great. Questions in the middle? Yes.
Yvonne, I have a question about Instituto.
Can you identify yourself, please?
I'm sorry. Judy Mortrude from Center for Law and Social Policy. Can you tell us a little bit more about your decision to create Istituto College? You talked about City Colleges of Chicago being a partner. What was missing from that partnership that really inspired you to create a college for your pathway?
Okay, so I think that the college was really something that, and the college is, just to be clear, it's a very humble program. We were just starting off with our ADN program, and actually through the sponsorship of JP Morgan Chase. So we felt that many of our students, Edna Lopez, for example, she's in our first cohort. She started off at Instituto, taking health ESL. Her parents actually started Instituto 20 years ago taking ESL classes. And so someone like her, she went through all our bridge pathway programs. She got her CNA, Certified Nursing Assistant. And then she always felt that Instituto was her educational home. And so she and other graduates sort of said, so, what do we do now? We got our CNA, some of them get off, right? They get off the ladder, they work for a few years, but their dream has always been to be a nurse. And so we started realizing that while we had a bridge up to, we helped them, let's say, access city colleges for their LPN, but what was missing? And of course, City Colleges has a huge, very comprehensive nursing program, but they can only serve so many students, right? And I think that many of our students, they have felt safe in coming to Instituto, and it was really, it was very ambitious, but with the support of a lot of different partnerships, we felt that we could try this because this would be the last piece of that.
Is this the first year that it's operating?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So maybe you'll come back next year and tell us how the first year went.
But it has been very challenging, I want to say.
Great.
I'm Deborah Bragg. I'm with Community College Research Initiatives at the University of Washington. In doing some research in this area, I began to see the implementation of career pathway coaches by employers. So, the need for advising around career pathways doesn't end when a student gets that credential and moves into the workplace. And I'm curious if you've seen employers who are picking up this idea that continuing to advise their employees on career pathway progression.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there enough of it going on? No, not even close, but we are seeing more employers doing it.
Can you give us an example of an employer that might be doing that? Or maybe, Deborah, you have an example of one?
I saw more people talking about the need for it than I saw, but I'd love to see.
Is it in particular sectors or?
Certainly, I've seen it around communications. I mean, AT&T would be one example that I would point out. But you have employers that really understand that unless a worker really has a vision for how they fit into the workplace, that they're not going to stick around. So that's one of the real driving forces. And in best case scenarios, what you have is employers really creating employee development plans from day one, and that's what really needs to be happening, right? But not enough of that is happening by any means.
Okay. We have a question that came in online. Explain how the equity gaps in grade school, middle school, and high school students affect the research in adult student education, and what do we know about the trend toward self-employment and entrepreneurship, and how are these training and education resources, are they adequate to support entrepreneurship? So it's two questions there. One is what if anything of what we've been talking about applies to grade school, middle school, and high school students? And second, what's the trend in preparing people for self-employment?
I'll say something at least about the first question. We know that achievement gaps open up very early, and this is of course separate from immigrants, other folks
Right.
didn't go to school here, but we know achievement gaps open up very early, and once they open up, they tend to persist. And a lot of them start well before people set foot in kindergarten, kids set foot, and then they persist and sometimes even widen. So the implication of that is there's a real need to reach out to these populations earlier. And I think what I hear a lot is that young people who don't particularly like math and science and don't do any of that stuff in middle school or do the absolute minimum, then by the time they get to career age or community college age, realize that there's a lot of good jobs in the technical area, but they chose not to take the math and science, or they weren't very good at it, and they had those. So, I think there's a lot of reasons for those gaps to be identified earlier in middle school, if possible. And also goes to the issue of career education. A lot of these kids simply have no idea why that algebra class actually might be useful when they try to get a good paying job. And I think, and that's not so expensive to give, a little more career information that might motivate them to sort of do things that collapse those gaps at least a little bit.
And to think of a longer term goal instead of just a short term
That's right.
goal. And what about, does the same apply for self-employment as well? Anybody? Yvonne or Brenda, do you deal with self-employment in the post-secondary education system, or is that something that's going to come from another policy area like the Small Business Administration or economic development?
So we do deal with some entrepreneurs in terms of, we have a Walmart grant actually for retail, and so we have been trying to help entrepreneurs expand their businesses, understand customer service, and get into those types of certifications for retail training. So, and
we know that that there's a lot of interest in self-employment, and when you survey individuals, particularly young people, and even some middle-aged people, there's an interest in self-employment, but the research that's been done on that really indicates that it's a very small percentage of those who might be interested in it that really are going to be able to make it. So it is not easy to start your own business, and it may be harder now than ever because of financial issues. But there are resources that are available, but it really takes a lot of upfront assessment and preparation and training to determine if that's the appropriate approach.
And Demetra, one of the things that we're doing in terms of the first question, and making sure that students are prepared for post-secondary education, we're working with identifying them early on in high school and determining if they're ready for post-secondary education before exiting the secondary system, so we can provide the remediation at the secondary level, and students don't have to come to higher education, use their federal financial aid for remedial work that doesn't count towards their degree program, et cetera. So there are lots of programs and solutions that we could be working on so they can come better prepared. Now that doesn't help with the adult student, but there are effective models in adult education like the IBEST model in Washington.
So it's really having preparation at each stage.
And knowing what's required of the other systems so that you can fully prepare folks for that transition and they can do that successfully.
But actually, if I may add, something that you said, and now you said, Brenda, reminds me that, one of the challenges for, I think, any of us is that we have to change the mindset of our clientele. Our TNTs, they're looking for a quick solution because they're struggling to make it right now. And so if you tell them, even if you tell some of our local entrepreneurs that coming to a workshop 4 hours a week is going to help you with your business and will help you, expand your customer service empire, then you have to convince them that this short-term investment is worth it, because just like our students, they are balancing, they're single parents, they're balancing so many needs, and so for them to come to you, you have to almost assure them that this credential is going to help them, right,
through their lives,
sort of change their life.
Harry, you mentioned at one point that it's important to earn while you learn. Can you say something a little bit more about which of those approaches or which models you think are useful in that regard?
Well, of course, the one that dominates in the public conversation is apprenticeship, the one you hear about the most, and I know here at the Urban Institute, if Bob Lerman was in the room, we'd hear a lot more about it.
Maybe he's
in a very
here.
positive way, of course. So apprenticeship is a good model. The research evidence is quite positive of the students or workers who engage in that model. The research evidence shows long-term gains, significant. Of the employers who do it, they tend to be quite satisfied. And then, of course, the big question is that economists always ask, if it's so great, why don't we see more of it?
Yes.
I think many employers are reluctant to make a longer-term commitment to a lot of individuals. I think they have a sense of the regulations being overwhelming. I think their sense of that is sometimes exaggerated. Of the costs, you hear these crazy numbers. Every apprentice costs $150,000. That's mostly wage costs, so it's a little unfair to put that. So that's the model. Now there again, that's a model that often requires really trainable people, and employers might be reluctant about some of these harder to serve populations, taking them on there. So then there might be a need for other models, other kinds of co-op or other kinds of activities that might be more suitable for other populations. I remember before the housing bust about a decade ago, a lot of us got the idea that, geez, construction's booming. Why don't we take a lot of the guys with criminal records and train them in construction and get them into apprenticeships? And the Aspen Institute actually did a study of that. And kind of the basic fact was very few of these guys could get through the pre-apprenticeship programs, much less. So it's challenging, even though it's a good model.
Right. We still have a couple more minutes. I just wanted to right now see if Jenny Sparandera has arrived. Great. And I hope you're ready for me to turn it over to Jenny before we end. And we hope you made it safely.
Yes, well, this morning I was reminded by that time-honored expression, woman makes plans, Amtrak laughs. So it's good to be here, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. I'll just add a couple of words. I was able to sneak in and listen to the last part of the discussion here. So first of all, looking at this panel and then looking around the room, I'm incredibly excited to see so many of our partners and grantees. But if we have not yet met, my name is Jenny Sparandera. I'm the head of workforce strategy in global philanthropy at JP Morgan Chase. So I'm lucky enough to work with a lot of the guests and panelists here today on a very regular basis as we think about what role JP Morgan can play in supporting really answers and solutions to the questions that we've been talking through this morning and that we're all, I know, grappling with. I'll just say a couple of points on why it is we do this. For us, this is not an abstraction. You know, we talk about employers. We are one of them. We have a global workforce of more than 250,000 people. That might immediately conjure images of a teller at the bank branch, and there are going to be branches here in Washington, D.C., you may have heard soon, or investment bankers. But the reality is for us, there are a lot of roles in between those 2 points, and figuring out what mobility looks like at our own company for our own workers, and thinking more and more clearly about the kinds of partnerships we need with entities like community colleges, like training programs, is something we spend a lot of time on, and an increasingly amount of time on. In addition to the way that this kind of lands at our own doorsteps, I'd say that every day we are talking with clients and customers about their own workforce and about the role that talent plays. And in fact, when we do our own sort of survey of businesses, you would not be surprised to know, but some people might, that talent is oftentimes the number 2 sort of concern on their mind behind how it is to sort of turn a profit, and it's an increasing area of concern. So we also know that, you know, while there's a lot of hand-waving around the future of work and how things are changing, there are immediate needs that people are really grappling with. Finally, I'm lucky enough to spend my time thinking about the community side of this and how it is that JP Morgan shows up in communities in a thoughtful way. As a grant maker, as an employer, as a partner, we do well when the communities that we work in and live in are thriving. So the idea of inclusive economic growth is one that hopefully you know we are deeply tied to, but we are not going to be shy about the role that jobs, skills, workforce development plays in all of that. We've had a 5-year, $250 million commitment to the issue that we've branded New Skills at Work. Hopefully you've bumped into it from time to time. We have an additional $75 million invested in New Skills for Youth, in which states like Rhode Island are trying new things and pioneering new efforts. In 2019, I will tell you we are going to double down on these strategies, and we'll be sharing more about where we think we can play a role in all of this. But, you know, I'll just sort of underscore something that Harry just said, which is we're very interested in how it is we identify these solutions and work to scale them. We have lots of little initiatives and great pilots all over the place, but I think, you know, the people in this room help hold the answers to how it is that we can take some of those sort of exemplars and make them much more commonplace, and then how we continue to push the edges out on what it is that we need to innovate and learn on. So very excited for the conversation we've had so far, and looking forward to where we go next. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll move away from the podium, is the Urban Institute has been an incredible partner to us in all of this work. They help us sort of think critically about where our grants are, where they should go, how we can kind of continue to push on innovation and tell the story of what we're seeing sort of on the ground. So a warm thank you to them for hosting this event, for you all for being here and taking time out of your busy Thursdays to join us. And with that, I'll turn it back.
And we thank Jenny and JP Morgan Chase because one of the things that the Urban Institute primarily does is building the evidence base and building the information and trying to add to the research and knowledge that will help move it. And we are certainly happy for the leadership and support of JP Morgan Chase, both as a corporation and as a philanthropy organization. I think we're out of time. I know we could talk more. I had many more questions. I'm sure many of you do as well, but we thank all of you for being here today and thank all of our panelists as well and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you very much. Thank you.